All right, we are recording. I'm trying to pull up those comments. Robert Thompson just sent me a photo of Rudy Ward, John Gentry, and himself.
Let's see if I can. Man, that's not clear enough for me to see.
I can send it to you.
Yeah, I would like that because I'm not sure which. I know several Robert Thompsons, and I'm just making sure it's the right one.
Okay. Hang on 1 second. I'll shoot it to you. Is this your cell phone that you're looking on or your wife's?
This is my wife. You can
Okay.
just shoot it to mine like you've been doing. We've been together so long we can't even make a phone call without each other.
Oh, I can.
All right, I just kicked that picture to your cell phone.
Okay. Oh yeah, yeah. That's. I think that guy might even be kin to John, some kind of distant kin or something, or was kin to. Anyway, but yeah, I worked with Robert quite a bit. I've got him. That's it.
Okay.
He's a good man.
Well, we're going to discuss Robert Thompson, Andrew McKinney, and who else was there? Let's see, Jeremy Frazer. And just, we'll talk as long as you can on each of them, where you met and what you're up to. But again, we're recording. I'm going to try to record a little intro, and then we'll get into it, kind of just like last time.
Okay.
Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined again here by Captain Rudy Ward in his potential retirement. We have since published his episode and gotten some feedback already from some people out there as he sips on his coffee of this New Year's Day morning. Captain Rudy, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tim. Hope you have a good New Year and everything goes well for you this year.
So far, so good. Thank you, sir. Have you gotten any other feedback beyond what I sent you already?
No, other than Jeremy Frazer called me last night and told me that I hadn't really paid any attention to this phone too much, Tim. But he told me you had already posted it. I knew you were going to post it, and then he said he had watched some of it, and he called me and let me know that. But but now Jeremy, he's a good guy, and I worked with his granddaddy, Captain Red Frazer. And he was a real good pilot, and so that's kind of how I got to know Jeremy, was through his granddaddy. And Jeremy was a deckhand over at Bungie, and a lot of the Bungie other deck crew, Jeremy was, you could tell he just had the genetics. He was already kind of moving up, and he got a little flack from some of the other deck crew, but Captain Raymond Timmons was helping him a little bit, not steering him per se, but just kind of talking to him, and you almost always wind up in this, when you're trying to learn and do better, you do have to separate from the crowd, and it's just that way. And so with that comes, that he's a suck up, or he's trying to butter up, or whatever term you want to use. But that's really not true. And Raymond, it kind of agitated him that the deck crew wouldn't leave Jeremy alone. Raymond told him, he said, "While y'all still tightening ratchets," said, "this boy's going to wind up being a pilot, and y'all going to work for him." And that's how the story played out. He had a pretty good history there with. I don't think he ever worked under his granddaddy, but his granddaddy was kind of an industry person. He was in the office and on the boats, and anyway, he was a good guy to me. And everybody determines what's good and bad in their own eyes. But Captain Red was a good man, but he was stern. And I never had a problem with rules, and as once I got on the river. Now I didn't do rules too good as a young person, but anyway, Jeremy, he moved up and wound up. I can't remember everything about it, but I know he wound up working for Captain Charles Strait, and that's where he really kind of got his feet wet, working up on the Arkansas River with Captain Charles. His crew, that was Charles's boats. He'd already gone into business by then. But now Jeremy, he worked actually on the boats, and he still does. But Jeremy works for Gentry in Rosedale in the fleet. He's been there a long time. But in the process, Jeremy, he didn't want to just ride the boats. So he took a couple of years off and went to college and got a business degree, and then came back to the boats. And he's been there ever since. And him and his wife, Ashley, she's educated and does real well, but they've done real good. And he's still been a long-term pilot for Jantran in the fleets in Rosedale. But he was a good guy. But then Captain Andrew McKinney. Now we really did pretty good. We worked together for 7, 8, 10 years, something like that, a good while. And he was the captain on the boat, but he was a young guy, and he worked for Pine Bluff Sand and Gravel, and he was really one of their top men, and as a young man, but he had never been on big tows. And so when they bought the 6000s, they built 3 brand new 6000s with. I went on the Gerald Majors with Andrew, and now he never did actually steer for me, but I was on there with him. I gave him pointers and just any way I could help him, I did. But I mean, he did most of it all on his own. But I never will remember. He said, and he was doing actually, if Andrew had not quit the river, he would have made. I don't know what he would have done, because he was connected with all the McKinneys down in New Orleans, so he had the connections and he had the skill. And I don't know. I think it was this blonde-headed girl he got with. I think she messed his head up. And because I told him at the captain's meeting, I said, son, you got to make your mind up. I said, you're either going to have to go home and protect her, or you're going to have to lose her. I said, because them guys at the captain's meeting, they was all bug-eyed and goo-gooed. And so I guess Andrew decided he better go home and stay with her. So I hadn't heard from Andrew in a long time. So I don't know how that's working. But anyway, Andrew, he could have made for sure, a 40 barge pilot or a big tow pilot. But now we did 30 all the time, and he did excellent on 30. And but he may have even gone on if he'd have stayed with it, because he had the connections to try to probably get into ship pilots down in New Orleans, and the family connections, and that helps. And so anyway, Andrew, I don't know what he's doing now, but we did a lot of stuff. We would run mostly from up on the Cumberland River. Pine Bluff had a quarry up there, mile 17. And we would run from there down to Old River. And the company had fleets down there around Old River. And so a lot of times we would get down there waiting on barges. And in the process of waiting, the office would bring us, crawfish, and we'd have big crawfish balls and big domino tournaments, and just because we had just a little slack time on that lower end at times, and so we was able to kind of have a little leisure time and fished and such as that when we were down around Old River. And so anyway, Andrew and I did a lot of, he made a good pilot, a first class pilot. And he was a good man to work for. And but now there again, I haven't talked to Andrew in a good while, so I don't really know um, what what he's got going nowadays in times. But and Robert Thompson, now Robert, he was just going into the pilot house back years ago, and I think what sitting here coming to mind, he had a uncle or I'm not sure what the relationship was. I think it was his uncle, maybe. But anyway, the dude Newcomb was a old time pilot back in the day, and Robert was connected to him in some kind of way. And anyway, Robert he went on to make a pilot, made a good pilot, but he did the same thing. He wound up. He was from up around Chicago somewhere, and I think he went into the construction business and was doing real good, making a lot of money in rental houses and such as that. I think that's how the story goes. And till today, I haven't heard from him in 25 years. So that was really good. I was to hear from, well, actually, I hadn't heard from Andrew McKinney either. So hearing them on your podcast was a blessing to me because I always liked them, but I just lost contact with them.
Well, from Andrew, he said he was one of the early commenters on when your episode published, and he said, "I love this man, a great relief and teacher, a ton of great stories." He said he rode with you 7 or 8 years, 28 days at a time. Great guy, great family, hard to find a better man. So,
Yeah,
it,
I would like to think that. Yeah, because yeah, we was just really good friends. He came to my house and spent the night with me and my wife, and she cooked. And his kids came, I think, once or the his son for sure came at least once or twice. But just kind of like, and when we had the pilots picnic, just different guys that came down, just like Gulagi. And so, some of them would either stay with me or they would come over, maybe come down a day early and we'd fellowship and go out and eat. Andrew did that kind of stuff also, just almost every time. And so we were pretty close friends during the time we worked together, probably closer than a lot of people. So that worked out real good with Andrew. And that other picture that Robert sent you with John Gentry. Now, Captain John, I'm getting ready to go see him tomorrow, actually, and he's retired down around Kosciuszko, Mississippi, Ethel, and now he was a huge influence on a lot of people. Now he was really a top gun, if you want to call him that. Now John could have told me, I didn't. I never was like a steersman, but a lot of these guys helped me just like I tried to help others. And you can like if I was close to watch change, well, if John was up, he would come up and make a lock, or maybe come up and make a bridge because it was convenient and he was awake. And so I learned that he did stuff like that for me. But now John Gentry could have told me to run it off of Niagara Falls, and I just took off. It just he was that I never questioned what he told me. What he told me I took for law. And it was just that if he said, Rudy, you can steer the bridge, and I steered all that stuff and up on that upper river, and I'd been up there, but not with 15 barges. And but if he told me he said you can do it. You get down there, and he would kind of give me the layout. And once I got down there, I just do what he said, and it worked every time. And so John was a big influence on a lot of younger guys like myself and Robert Thompson, and back in those days, you didn't have quote steersman programs, and And, you know, the office didn't say, well, Rudy, we're going to send you a steersman for this next trip. You didn't, you just worked with people that you saw potential in, and people that most of the time it would be a mate that had really done you a good job and asked questions and really made an effort on his own to try to do better. And then when you would find somebody like that with a skill set, well, then you would begin to help them, not as a steersman, but a lot of times on their time off. Like I've known any number of them, they would work 20-hour days, and they would work a watch, steer a watch, work a watch, and maybe even steer another couple hours before they came back on watch. So it was a long, hard thing. And just like when I first come down the river with 30 barges, I had Captain Byron Morgan on the boat, and I asked him would he mind if I watched him make any of the bad spots or the bridges on his watch. He said, no, that would be fine. Well, now that first trip south, I I got almost very little sleep. It's probably scary, really, but I stayed up and I watched everything. I didn't miss anything, and I did that probably 3 or 4 trips. I did my watch, and then I'd get up and watch him make any of the bad spots on his watch, and I picked it up pretty quick. And that's how most Jeremy or Robert, all of us kind of boiled in the same pot, if you want to say that, because that's just that's how it was done then. You didn't you 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 kind of had to operate on the captain's merit, and you know the company, the office wasn't too much involved in training pilots. That was something that the captain might call, say, look, I've been working with Robert, he's doing a good job, I think he's about ready to go get some license. And so that would a lot of times be the first time the company would hear anything about him, even being trying to make a pilot out of him. So the companies weren't real connected to the pilot process in the early days. That was more the captain and or whoever was on the boat, and then it went on into the office. But all those guys, I can't remember when I was. See, I taught for Bill Hutto. I got married. My wife was Jesse Brent's uh, personal secretary. And of course, he was done already old then, but he's a real good man, Captain Jesse was, and real likable. And so I was working for Brent, and but I actually met my wife, Eileen. I met her at a church, and and then found out that she was working for Brent and I was working for Brent. So we just kind of wound up all together. Well, after I got married, well, I quit the river and I went to work for Captain Bill Hutto at Western River Training Centers. And I was teaching school, and I taught lots and lots and lots of guys. And I didn't stay there too long, but it was at a time when there was just, man, we'd be snowed every week, people coming in, and just, you know, like Captain Jimbo Davis, I helped him get his license. Charles Strait came in there, helped Captain Charles get his license. He came in, Charles was one of the colorful characters. Charles came in, he was working up at the White River Fleet up at Rosedale. Now, Charles Strait, if you don't know him, he's a monster of a man, probably 6'2" or 3" or 4", big man, broad shouldered. And when he came in as a deckhand, he came in, he had a big beard, and he had a logging chain around his neck, and he had pair of old black Brogan shoes on and some overalls. I believe it was overalls. But anyway, he come in. He said, "I'm Charles Strait." Said, "I want to get my pilot license. I'm from White River Fleet." And he was a monster. I mean, that guy probably weighed 400, or just a monster. And I looked him up and down. I said, "Well, now you're going to get your license." I said, "Don't worry. You're going to get some license." And, but Charles was the most agile man that I've ever seen. I've never seen a man that was that big and that raw bone, that Charles could stand flat footed right in front of the door, and he could just take his foot and raise it up and set his foot on the top of the door facing without trying to kick it up there. I've never seen anybody that agile. And he was real mean and tough, just fight, he'd fight them 4 and 5 at a time, and just, Charles was something else. And Charles wound up being just a really super good pilot, just just top level. And then he went into the business, and he got a break some kind of way, and wound up where he is today as an owner, and a very successful owner. But anyway, there was a lot of those guys that I remember just starting from the very ground up to where they are today. Just Captain Jimbo, and just he and I grew up here in Greenville together. But it just, I don't even know Captain Tim. It just lots and lots of them. The longer you talk, the more things come to your mind. But there's lots of them. And then through Pilots Agree, that was, we had, I met so many. So I know so many people, and I like them, and they, but I cannot remember. Now I don't hardly ever forget a face, but I'm trying to remember names. Never has been my good point. Even back at years ago, I just names just, and I guess I don't. You had to be a genius to remember all the names of the people that I know, and kind of run with. But anyway, those that sent replies on your mail, they was good guys. And but I guess we could just go on all day. I don't just kind of get in the vein of thought, whatever you want to try to talk about.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not going to cut you off, not going to get in your way. But on that note, Robert Thompson said about you that you and he go back to the 80s when you worked on Logan boats on the upper. What do you remember
Oh,
about that?
well, it scarred me for life. I'm scarred. You can't even imagine what, in today's world, it was just unbelievable. Logan, they had a bunch of old junky boats and 2 or 3 good boats, but most of them was old junk piles. The Evening Star, the Moonlight, uh, the Sunshine. Then they had the Hillman Logan, which was a good boat, and the Lucy Logan were good boats. But we rode them all, and I have really, to be honest with you, Tim, um, I I wish that I could turn back the clock and apologize to some of the deck crew we had back in those days. Now they was all wild, and you know, you didn't have HR back then. Just as an example, if you had trouble on the boat, then I just tell them, I said, "Look, y'all go out there about that third coupling now, and when you come back, be happy." And so just time and time again, they'd make them run out to the third or fourth coupling, and sometimes they'd fight. Sometimes, most of the times, they didn't fight. And once they got out there, they got straight and come on back and went to work. And just like one time, we was on Old Sunshine, and we had a lot of sand barges, flat deck barges that trip going up to Illinois. Everybody on the boat was in a bad mood. They was all just mad at the world, and I don't know what the problem was, but everybody was mad. And so I called them up. I said, "Go catch me a line." And they said, what, why are we tying off? I said, "Because I'm tired of all this being mad." I said, "Now I got enough sense to know y'all want to whoop me." I said, "I'd probably like to whoop y'all." I said, "But now we're going to go out here and catch this line, and we're going to all get out here on this tow, and then we're going to get happy." I said, "So just whatever it's going to take for all of us to get happy," I said, "that's what we're getting ready to do." And so they said, "Well, we don't really want to do it." I said, "Okay." I said, "But that's the end of it." I said, "Now we're getting ready to just get happy and go to work." And they got happy and we all went to work. But Tim, we would carry 15 loads out of St. Paul, Minnesota, Pig's Eye Fleet, or even go on up into above the old airport fleet above Pig's Eye Bridge up there, I guess it was. And we brought those tows out, 15 loads out of St. Paul on 30, those were 3,200 horsepower boats. And I guess they were better boats than, because we made it, but we could have never made it without the deck crew, because those guys, and that's what kind of reconnect. I would love to be able to apologize to those guys, because they was all dope heads, and what wasn't dope heads was alcoholics. They was all just fresh out of jail or on their way to jail, and just tough old guys. But I really liked them. But you just kind of get tired of the drama, and it was always lots of drama when you're dealing with drugs and alcohol on the boats, which you don't have that out there now like you used to. But back then, it was just like you could go and in the day, this is true. People deny it or say no, but I don't. It doesn't matter. It is true. You could take and you could trade a ratchet, a 35-foot wire, and a chain strap for an ounce of pot up in St. Paul. And I won't go into any more details, but they would, they was bad. They'd steal rigging, and you didn't know it. As the captain on the boat, you didn't know they was stealing rigging, but they would steal rigging and swap rigging for dope. And the same way down in New Orleans, you get in those fleets down there, you could trade rigging for dope or just, and it was just everywhere. But that said, those guys were fearless. I mean, it was unbelievable how they could handle a lock lines and check a toe into a lock, and just their skill level was really off the charts, especially compared to what you have today. Not that these guys are bad, it's just they, like some of this other stuff, just like what you're doing, like what Melanie Golden did with her book, y'all are capturing stories and events that will never be relived again. They'll never be relived again because that's all gone. With human resources and OSHA and safety regs and the Coast Guard's involvement. Coast Guard wasn't involved. Back in the day, they was pumping oil in the river, and just on and on what all the pollution, when all that's gone. Those are things that'll never happen again. And so it was just a different time and a different era. And but those guys were really, truly first class. Man, they could talk you in a lot and just and accurate. If they told you were an inch wide, you better come ahead on it. You was an inch wide. If they said you was in the dark, don't doubt them because you were getting ready to hit the lock. And they were just that good and accurate. Just really, at least the ones that I worked with were. I mean, just some really just and you know, we had clashes over the drugs and just trouble on the boat due to drugs and drinking and gambling. And but if you could get beyond that and just get down to the job, they did just a phenomenal job. And Logan, you know, we were underpowered, overloaded, and so we compensated that through just super skilled deck crew and just, I guess, all of us just worked really hard to try to get those boats up and down the river. But it was rough. Now I'm telling you, it was rough. It just and you couldn't, you didn't have the option to stop because you could not stop hardly ever in when the river was running, and it was just I'm telling you, it was something else now. And just like we now, there's some of the older guys remember it, but when we first went over to the Ohio River, we were carrying 30 loads out of Cincinnati, right below Cincinnati, and rather than making a double locking on a 15 barge river, well, we would split those 30 in half and lock 15 at a time. And but those were huge tows and for the Ohio River at that time, and just I don't know, man. We've done a lot of hard work, some serious work, scary old work. Because most of the time, when you had turned loose going down river, you didn't really know if you were gonna make it or not. It just it was always a maybe. You just might make it, hope we make it, and so it was some real hard days up there with Robert and Captain John Gentry and all just Raymond Timmons. He was an awesome man, and those guys were um, like Captain Raymond Timmons. I've known that man for almost 50 years, and he worked at Arco on the big boats. I never knew the man to have an accident. And that's to say something, to ride the junk we rode and to never have any kind of a real accident is a pretty good track record. I never knew him. I never knew John, Captain John Gentry. I never knew him to hit a bridge or anything major, nothing major. I mean, you know, you might tear a corner out or knock a bridge timber off or something, but to actually have a dyed in the wool true accident, a lot of those guys that I knew just didn't. They were just really, really good, first class pilots, and we worked with first class deck crew. And the deck crew on the locking rivers made us either look real good or real bad. And so I was fortunate enough to work with good guys that made me look pretty good. But that was not acquired of my own volition. They were just I just listened to them. I didn't second guess them, and I didn't try to go to war with the deck crew because you had to have them. Now I've seen guys go to war with deck crew, but I never did because, well, I just smart enough to know that man could either make you or break you. And so anyway, I tried to always have a good relationship with them best I could, unless we just got crossed up and couldn't get it straight. But anyway, but those Logan days, Logan Charter Service, now they went out of business. But now we did some hard work for those people. I mean, some sure just treacherous work. But anyway, that's kind of how that went.
Thank you for that, Cap. I've got some other comments I want to read and get some more thoughts from you.
Okay.
What comes to mind? Mr. Robert Thompson uh, said as well that you were a Jerry Clower kind of guy and that y'all done some things.
Well, just and I don't know about that, but you know, just the stories like over there at Logan, it just never ended. It was always colorful because you had just like I say, they was either in jail or going to jail or just got out of jail. just and then just it was just and so it was, and I guess maybe maybe I was able to tell what was going on. They weren't made up stories. I mean, they were true things, but I guess the unbelievable is what it is. But but anyway, it was just, and those type boats working in those conditions that gave the stories. And so, I could probably write 1,000-page book on just all what went on. But now over there, Logan, as just a quick example, we were going up the Illinois River, and it was horrible. It was bitter cold, and it actually when we got to St. Paul, got to Chicago, it was like one night, I never forgot it. It was like 27 below zero actual temperature, and the chill factor was like 80 something below. And we still working. See those guys, they just go out for a few minutes, but they just didn't do nothing. They would go out, work 5 to 10 minutes, come back in, back and forth all night, all day. And so it wasn't like they just sat up and looked out the window. It was really, the working conditions were horrible. And I never will forget, a lot of Southern guys like myself had never seen those kind of temperatures or anything. We had a few Northern boys on there, and they took one of those deckhands, and they bet him $20 that he wouldn't stick his tongue on that barge, and which he had no idea. And you know where all that's going, but he had no idea he was getting ready to have to peel the hide off his tongue, but he stuck his tongue to that barge, and then he was trapped. He couldn't get it off. It's about to kill him. It's 87 below zero, and he was screaming, "It's my tongue, my tongue! Help me, help me!" And they wouldn't help him, and he just finally had to just man up and jerk his head off the barge, and he couldn't drink water for a week. It just pulled all the hide off his tongue. And then we got up to St. Paul, and there was an old boat up there called the Cutting Horse. And this was over at Logan back in the day. And the Cutting Horse, they were trying to rearrange the fleet because the weather was so bad. Well, the deckhand was probably 3 or 4 barges out on the tow, and the pilot wanted to move the boat. So the pilot went downstairs to turn the boat loose, just had a line, and wound up turned the line loose and fell in the river. The pilot did. Well, the deckhand started screaming, "Mayday, Mayday," and we were probably a couple of tow lengths away from them, maybe at another end of the fleet. So we ran up there. By the time we got there, this guy was frozen. The only thing that saved him is he had grabbed a hold of the face wires and clasped his hands, and his hands froze. And so he wasn't hanging there by his strength. He was just frozen to those face wires. And when we got there, his eyes were almost frozen, and we weren't there. But we got to him pretty quick. But it didn't take. But with those kind of temperatures, you. But we got him out of the we got him out of the river, and he couldn't hardly talk. But when he was talking, he started cussing real bad on us. I said, "Man, shut your mouth." I said, "You about dead as it is." I said, "And cussing like that." I said, "I'm not going to be listening to all that." And so we drug him on inside the boat and took a butcher knife and cut his clothes off of him down to his underwear. And we were able to get him and get him in a shower, and you know you've got to manipulate the temperature on that water to keep him from going into shock. And so I just had it just barely cool. And when we got him up in that shower, he then he was so cold and so frozen that the shower, the water would fall off of him like BBs. It was just it was unbelievable. But we saved that man, and he never went into shock. And finally, the ambulance got down there, and we got him up to the hospital. And 3 hours later, he was back on the boat, piloting the boat. So, and I don't know, but that's just one of many stories, not many, but people that have pulled out of the river and had to do some kind of first aid on them, try to keep them alive. And I well remember, I don't remember her name, but there was a cook. She fell in the river up on the Ohio River. Well, they didn't want to take her clothes off of her, which you got to get the clothes off of them. And they didn't want to take her clothes off, so they put her in a bed and with those wet clothes on, freezing and to pull her out of the icy river. And she went into shock and died because you just can't do that. You've got to get that interior body temperature up, but you got to do it slow, and you can't or you'll throw them into shock. But we saved I don't know 3 or 4 different guys through the years, and you know they were never went into shock and was able to keep right on working. But those were Logan days, and it just so you know like today as an example, you've got these electronic charting systems, and you can lay track lines, and then they have the sailing lines are pretty accurate on these new charting systems. Well, see, today you can just about leave St. Louis without any buoys and be in reasonable shape because of the electronic charting system. But back then, you had nothing. You couldn't put a sounder in when the river got iced up, and so you just was running. A lot of times we just ran daylight because you had to be able to see the break on the end of the dikes and read the river, and it was just a lot harder, just real hard. And then the river back then, and I guess I'm not much a big believer on climate change per se, but the river, the climate has changed. Now, I tell you, I can't tell you why, but used to the Illinois River, it froze every year. It would gorge up. We were fighting gorges in the upper river. The old cliche was if you weren't southbound out of St. Paul by Thanksgiving, you're going to spend the rest of the winter on the upper. And so all those rivers would freeze, and I've seen flowing ice down below Natchez, and the upper was gorged up between St. Louis and Cairo was gorged. Um, you could just almost walk across the river up around Paducah. It was all iced up, gorged up. Um, it's just unbelievable what we did up on the Illinois River. We was at Bulls Island Cut, and it's not very far between Marcel's Lock and Mayo Island, below Ottawa. It's just a short distance. It took us 5 days to try to do 20 miles, working 24 hours a day. And this was Logan. And we had the Colonel George Lambert with 4,200. We had the Mobile Joliet of 4,200. And we had 2 of the big Ingram triple screws that were 6,600s, I think it was. And we were all on one barge. and we were in the gorge at Bulls Island Cut. And I was faced up to the barge, and the Mobile Joliet was faced up behind me, and the two Ingram boats were the same way on the lower end. And all of a sudden, I looked out, and we were trying to get that barge to break loose. Well, what happened, we never did get the barge at that time, broke loose, but we broke the gorge. And when we did, it just washed all of us down the river through Bulls Island Cut over rocks and everything, Lord knows. And I don't know how we didn't sink anything, but we didn't. It's a miracle because that's all rock. And we totally out of control, and we were just flying. Um, Caught up in that gorge going down towards the Ottawa bridges, and completely out of control, nothing you could do, and just wrapped up in ice. And we got that last turn, and we could see the bridge, and it gorged again right above those bridges. Well, we all broke loose from that barge. We didn't want any more of that. And so we kind of tried to regroup, but it was a battle, man. This is just a battle. Um, just trying to fight the river and get up and down the river back in those days in the wintertime when it would gorge. But I did most of my ice work with Logan Charter Service on those smaller boats, and but it didn't matter what size the boat was. I know one time they sent one of the big Valley Line boats up there, and we were running around with 2 and 4 barges, and that was too many. And he came up there with 15 barges. And well, he didn't make it 10 miles up the Illinois River, and he was shut down, got gorged in, and sat there the rest of the winter by himself. And so those were just really hard days, and of course all your navigation helps, the day markers and the buoys and crossings. Most of the time, all those were gone because of the weather, or you just couldn't see them. And so you was just operating off the seat of your britches. And but there again, a lot of times we worked just straight daylight hours, so you could try to read the river what little bit you could, do the best you could. But anyway, those were old Logan days, and it was some hard days, hard work, real hard work. But we made it, and finally moved on up from there to more modern boats, and and then just kind of they went out of business, and everybody separated and went on their way. But that's kind of how that was.
Well, from Robert's comment, who was Jerry Clower?
Oh, what Jerry Clower? Now you need to Google him. You'll enjoy. He was a comedian back from Yazoo City, Mississippi, and he was real famous back in the day. And Jerry Clower, Clower, babe. Yeah, Jerry Clower. Now you'll enjoy him, but he would tell all kind of old hunting stories, and just you'd have to listen to him. But Jerry Clower was a comedian and real popular back during that time, back in the 80s and 70s. And so they said that I would tell a story kind of like Jerry Clower would tell stories about hunting and coon hunting and just different things. But he was a comedian back in the 70s. So if you can still find him on YouTube, but he's real funny. If you've never heard him, you might want to check him out.
But he's a Mississippi State graduate.
Yeah, he was a Mississippi guy from Mississippi State, but then he could tell story. Jerry Clower he was a chemical salesman, actually, graduated from Mississippi State University. And when he would go to these big meetings and trying to sell chemicals and do those type events, well, he would kind of incorporate some of his old hunting stories, and some of the old people in his area that were real true people that did true things, and the common average person would never believe it, never heard of it. And so he actually took that knowledge and those stories and gave up the chemical business and went into comedy, and he went a long time doing Christian comedy, but he was real good. He was real funny. If you get a chance to look at him.
I got you. I'll take a look. I'll see what I can track down.
Yeah, you'll like that. Yeah,
But
it's pretty good.
sticking with these comments and getting back to somebody we've already discussed a little bit, from your first episode here with me, Jeremy Frazer said, "Great man, great friend, definitely a joy to hear the history he has to offer. Not many left of that generation to be able to learn from. I am blessed to know Rudy and a few others from his generation that taught me a few things in this industry before the electronic charts ever came to play. A lot of river history and knowledge in this man here. God bless you, Captain Rudy."
Well, Jeremy, when his granddaddy died, Jeremy was still a deckhand, and I told him at his granddaddy's funeral, I said, "Now, Jeremy," I said, "if I can help you," he was just a young guy. I said, "if I can help you, I will." And then my wife gave me marching orders. She said, "You better help that boy." And I said, I will if I can. But I never was able to do much for him. But Captain Raymond Timmons helped him a lot. And, you know, I would feed him information as best I could, but I tried to help him a little bit. But through the years, Jeremy has, and he still comes to see me and visits, some. And so he's been a real good friend all these years. He's a good man. And him and his wife been married a long time, got a fine family, and they're just doing real well. And he's, like I say, he's still full-time pilot at Rosedale for Gentry. But anyway, I never did actually get to work with Jeremy, but I worked around him. And actually, when I actually met him, he was already fast tracking to the pilot house. So he was a deckhand one time, and the next time I saw him, had his license and moving on up. Then just kind of went from there.
Well, I've written down a few names while you've been talking. I'd like to know more about these individuals. So, speak as freely as you wish, but sticking with the Frazers, tell me about Red Frazer, what you know of him, where he came from, where you met him, anything that comes to mind.
Well, I really didn't know Captain Red that good, but I worked with him over at James Nile on the Miss Chris, and I worked with him, I don't know, probably about a year. But now Red, he was, and I don't know, he was pretty colorful, and I really don't know a lot of details about his life. I do know that he had been an industry man. He'd been on the boats, then he worked in the office for somebody, or maybe more than one. But he was kind of an industry man, been in the industry a long time back in the day, and but he was a really good pilot, and now for me personally, and Tim, I always evaluated people on how they did me. Everybody else may hate their guts, but if they never did anything to me and I was able to, so I kind of had a history of being able to be friends and work with people that a lot of other people couldn't get along with or didn't. Um, now, I tried to, I've been a Christian the whole time. I got saved when I was 19 years old, and so I was a Christian the whole time on the river. Was not an easy task, and but I guess that had to help me in getting along with some of these guys that a lot of people couldn't get along with. And I had my own set of troubles with them. I'm pretty hot tempered, and if they, I've had different ones cross me, and I don't do crossing too good. And I like I say, um, we didn't have human resources, I had an old mate. He come upstairs going to fight, and well, I would have fought him, but he once he got up there, he decided he didn't want to. And but when the captain got up there the next morning, he said, "Rudy, how come you didn't let me know all this?" I said, "Well, no, look, Captain," I said, "I fight my own battles." I said, I didn't need you to fight that man for me. We worked it out, and we did. And so there was, and I do regret some of it in the early days because my temper was pretty bad. I wasn't beyond. I jerked them up and slung them against a wall, but they would provoke me. I mean, I wasn't looking for trouble, but they just wouldn't quit. And but what bothered me more than anything was the fact that even after I done slung them against a wall or whatever I did, I would ask for forgiveness, ask them to forgive me, and I really meant it. And they may have actually forgiven me, and I'd say most of them probably did. But at the end, I was never able to really win them to Jesus because of my character flaw. And so I've had to work on that. I'm still working on it. I ain't got it all where it needs to be, but I'm trying to get it pushed in the bag. And that's just kind of how it went. But Red, he was kind of the same way, which lots of them was. I mean, that was just, as I understand it, Tim, back in the um, old days when they would raft things down the river and pole things, to be the mate on one of those old raft boats where you poled your way down to New Orleans, if you was going to be the mate, well, you had to be able to whip everybody on the boat because you had to have that authority to be able to get things done. Otherwise, they would question you. And so, that's going back to the 1800s, but I've done a lot of studying and reading. And that's the way I understand it, that on the old pole boats, when they was poling their way down New Orleans to get to be mate, you had to be able to beat up everybody on the boat, but you had to be able to do that. And a lot of times, kind of going back to what my dad told me, firm, friendly, and fair. Well, now that firm part of it sometimes has to come in part of it, because if they think they can just walk over you, you don't have to try to be a god or some obnoxious character or some, but you do have to. It's like Captain John Gentry said one time. I never forgot it. He's one of the best I ever worked with. But he said, he told the deckhand, he said, "Look, I'm not asking you to respect me." He said, "But I am asking you to respect my job." He said, "Because I have a job to do." And at the end, when it's all said and done, they bypass everybody, and it always starts at the top and works its way down. So if there's trouble, if there's a problem, if there's an accident, or whatever it might be, there's plenty to blame to go around, but it starts at the top, and as a rule. And so sometimes you had to be maybe more firm than, maybe you didn't have to be as firm as you were, but sometimes that's just what it took, because it, you don't have today, you don't have people questioning your authority like you did back then, because they didn't care, and they weren't afraid to go to jail, and their jobs really didn't really mean that much to them, even a good job. And so if you got crossed, well, fighting and quitting and such as that was just kind of went along with it. That was just part of it. And I'm glad to see that part gone. Of course, I won't have to deal with that, but it was different, Tim. It was, dealing with with your ability to deal with people and try to get the job done. And because a lot, they might just say, well, I'm just not going to do that. And they just all quit and go home. Just so it was just a different, it was just a different world. And you had to be able to try to get the job done without just being a monster and just creating you could just fire them all. And I have had to fire 4 and 5 at a time, but I didn't want to do it, but that's just what it took. And so anyway, that's just kind of how all that went.
You mentioned him a few times and spoke highly of him. Tell me what you can about Mr. John Gentry.
Oh, well, you ain't got the time. Like I say, I'm getting ready to go see him tomorrow. He was, John was, he was a first class pilot. If on a scale of 1 to 10, he was certainly, I don't guess anybody's a 10. I always like to try to think of myself as it being at least a 5. I would hate to think I didn't progress to a 5. Now, there's been times in my life I was a 0, but I would like to think I progressed to a 5. But John Gentry was one of them that he was a 10 or 9, but he was at the very top. Now he's 80 something years old now, and he's retired. But he was a good man and just awesome pilot and just a real. He really helped me a lot. Like I said, I would have run off the Niagara Falls if that's what he told me to do. I just had that kind of confidence in him. But how I actually met John was Captain George Reed. And George, he was like my towboat daddy. And George was he was the only man in the whole system. And George worked for Brent back in the day, and he worked for everybody, but mostly the Greenville companies. But George would he would oversee taking these big gorilla rigs from Laterno in Vicksburg down to New Orleans. And he was real colorful now. He was the only man that Lloyd's of London would accept or insure to oversee those jobs. And now, after they did it for a good many years, there were other companies that took it up other than Brent. But George pioneered all that, and George, I think John may have decked for George or worked under George in some capacity. But George called John, and I was working on unit tows for Magnolia Marine at the time. At the time, and George told John, said, John, said, I want to make Rudy a big boat pilot. Said, I need you to help him. And John and George were real close friends. John had helped George carry those big gorilla rigs down. And so John, he had confidence in what George said. He said, well, George, if you say help him, I'll help him. And so I went to work for Logan Charter Service under George Reed that was going to help me. And but I didn't get much help because George was supposed to ride down with me. We got to St. Paul, but I didn't need any northbound help. But we got to St. Paul, picked up 15 barges headed south. Well, we got down to lock 4. No, we got down to lock 7 at La Crosse. I believe it's 7, yeah. And he got off. And he told John, he said, John, Rudy don't need no help. And he said, just kind of like keep him lined out going downriver, he'll be okay. And so George, he just went on home, and I worked with him some after that. And the same way with John Gentry, I worked with John quite a bit through the years on different boats, different levels. And but John was always just he was one of the top guys to me, and still is. And now George Reed, he's passed on, and you know we've lost just in the last month, we've lost Captain Dickie Mathis, we lost um, Captain Mickey Jarvis, and I don't know, they leaving out of here fast. A lot of talent gone. John Gentry's retired, and you can't hardly replace that knowledge. And now these guys today, they running these big boats, and they're doing a good job. But those guys just kind of that I came up under, those guys were just, you know, they just didn't have anything to help. No tools, no pilot house tools, just a searchlight and an old radar half work, and sometimes a swing meter, sometimes not, and just like I don't know, I don't remember who was on the boat with me, but the old Moonlight over there at Logan's, uh, as an example, the uh, the rudder indicators went out, and we had air steering, so you didn't know where your rudders were except by those rudder indicators. They went out, and the steering was still working, but the indicators wasn't working, so you never knew where your rudder was. And so to try to get by until we could get it fixed, um, we took two fuel sticks that they stuck down in the fuel tanks to measure the amount of fuel. Well, we took them back. We had an open stern that was open. It wasn't closed in, and so they put those two fuel sticks, and they put one on one rudder and one on the other so that you could line them up, and you would know where straight rudder was. Well, we went down river on old Moonlight 16 barges, and you had to look behind you. We had pigtail lights on those two sticks, and so we could, like range lights, we could keep line things up so we kind of knew where. And then we made it on down river. Well, that's the kind of mess John had to put up with. Just man, it was just on and on, old heavy toes, and couldn't stop. And but I don't know, John, he was something else now. But we made it. And of course, Captain George Reed, he died years ago. But he had a million stories, and John had this is a pretty interesting story. And just anytime you need to shut me down, just cut me off. But this is pretty interesting. A lot of people don't know George Reed. His daddy owned the ice house in Rosedale back in the day, and they had a little old small steamboat, a boat, a big boat with a steam engine on it. But anyway, they would go up the White River, and they would go out and they would buy buffalo, and they would buy fish and bring those back. George did that, and they would bring them back to the ice house, and they would process those fish and load them in rail cars. And Rosedale was the largest freshwater fish export in the United States, and a lot of people didn't know that, and it just went away after the Great Depression. And but at the time, George, his daddy owned that, and he said, "Rudy, we were rich people," and and they, but he said they went to bed rich and they woke up poor um, when the Depression hit, and lost everything, and wound up living on a houseboat until he got old enough to go to work as a pilot. And George could not read his name in boxcar letters, could not read at all at that time. And George finally wound up, they wanted to make him, give him part interest in Brent Towing Company when Jesse was alive. And George said, Jesse, he said, I don't want to be a rich man. He said, I just want a job. That's all I want. And so George, they said he could pick up a ice back in them came in 1,000-pound blocks. And they said George could deadlift a 1,000-pound block of ice by himself. And he would take a 55-gallon drum of gas on a fuel flat and bear hug it and pick it up and set it on the side of the boat. And he was much of a man. Well, talking about John Gentry, see, John and George were just, now John was a small guy, small frame guy, but he was tough as nails and just bad tough. And so all those guys, Tim, are just characters. And, you know, John's got a million stories of, he was a big deer hunter and a big fighter and just fought and just, you know, and that was the era for people around the Delta and Greenville and the river cities. All the river cities were pretty tough. If you had colorful, if you had river cities, you had a lot of activity and a lot of color. It didn't really matter whether it was Greenville or Paducah or St. Louis or Wood River, Illinois. Just they were all, you know, Wood River, Illinois was unbelievable back in the day when Lot 26 was still in operation, and boats would be just lined up for miles, and people hitchhiking to town, and Grafton, Illinois, and all up there at Wood River. That place was just like maggots on a gut pile. There's just people everywhere, just all up and down. All the honky tonks were just 24 hours and going about like Bourbon Street in New Orleans. It just, and all of them was that way. But anyway, John was a good guy, and just all these old guys I worked with, you know, there again, they just, the stories just don't end, you know, just stay here longer than what you can sit, you know, telling those kind of stories and the Jerry Clyde thing. And, but the thing about them, Tim, is they're actually all true. You know, people now, a lot of it's not funny. It's funny to another riverman, but it's not really funny to people on the bank because they just can't grasp the terminology and, you know, the events, and they can't see it in their mind. And so it just doesn't have what you and I might think is really funny. You can tell that to just somebody on the street and they get nothing out of it because they just can't put it all together. But to me and you, we may really laugh and get a lot out of it. But anyway, that's just kind of, you know, kind of how it was. And I guess I could kind of tell stories and just retell those events and make it funny and it still be true, and maybe put a little flair to it if you want to call it that. But they were all true stories. Just, you know, just snakes on the boats and coons on the boats and cats on the boat and just all kind of things. Just shooting on the boat. They shoot the boats up, and just, you know, it was a different world and a different era. That's just kind of where we, you know, that's kind of, and so as things progressed, I'm kind of a person that's not given to change. You know, if it's working, I say leave it alone, don't fix it. And but so times just, you know, the computers in the pilot house and trying to work with human resources and OSHA and working with the Coast Guard. Well, that just, I didn't come up that way. I wasn't used to it. I didn't like it. You know, I clashed with the Coast Guard a lot of times. Because like I told them one time, I said, listen, I said, y'all want to tell us what to do. I said, and the highest admiral in the Coast Guard can't even face this boat up. I said, he sure can't make a bridge or anything we do, and yet y'all be gonna make the rules to tell us what to do. And so I just clashed with that. And I clashed with the officers a lot of times, wanting to load the boat up, and they had not a clue what it took to get those barges down the river. You might take 30 barges this time and it'd be okay, but next time it's not okay. Well, then you had to go through a huge argument to get them to cut the boat back to where you're not just wrecking every turn. And so and back in the day, the captain on the boat, the office would call and say, how many barges do you want? They didn't call you and tell you how many barges you're going to have. They asked you how many did you want. And then according to the river conditions, then that's how you determine your tows. And so I just myself and my personality, I just clashed with with just like OSHA and a lot of OSHA things that OSHA did was really good. They did a good thing, but they went overboard with it. And the same thing with the officers as they turned more. Because, you know, back in the day, you was really dealing with the owners. You weren't dealing with people that worked for the owners. You was mostly dealing, when you talk to somebody, those officers didn't have maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people in the office, and that was it. Even big companies, you were dealing with, so you didn't have to go down the chain of command because you was usually dealing with the top man. And so you were able to get things done without all the scrutiny that, you know, if you told Jesse Brent, if George told Jesse Brent, Jesse, we don't need to do that, that was the end of it. It didn't matter who else wanted to do it or whatever they said. If George said it, that was it. John, same way, John Gentry. And all them old captains back before the officers began to take more and more control and power or decision-making power away from the pilot house. And it was just more do what you told, and if you don't like it, we'll just hit the road. And so that kind of operation, you know, I was more the type that just hit the road because I just, you know, I just didn't do too good being pushed and pressed. And I did all right. I wasn't anti-company, but I was kind of anti. I never did mind working for Charles Strait or working for Harold Dodd or any of those guys that were actual, real, true pilots. Because you could tell them what was going on, they understood it, and they would 90% of the time or more agree with you. And so you could just go on and do your job. But today, it's just it is mandatory that you do the computer, fill out the paperwork, do all a million things that's got nothing to do with piloting the boat. And so I just faded out of the picture to where I'm at today, and just about faded out because it just just turn it over to young people that bend a little more, not as rigid as myself. and I don't really see myself being much different than most all them old guys, because you wasn't gonna tell them very much. You might tell them a little bit. You wasn't gonna tell them no whole lot. So anyway, that's just kind of where we are today. John Gentry, he was one of the ones that he did really good. Now George, he didn't do too good on taking rules and such as that. George, he didn't do that. And so it was kind of a transition period, and I was caught in it, and the train left the station, and I never caught up. So that's just kind of where I'm at today. On a podcast, if anybody told me I'd be doing some kind of old podcast like this, of course, I couldn't do it without my wife, but I would never get it done. Whatever Zoom or whatever you call this thing, that would not happen. It just, I'm penciling paper and phone call. I can operate the phone pretty good. But anyway, that's where all that was.
Well,
What, babe?
It's 12:01.
Okay.
I am thankful for your wife, and I'm thankful you could join me on this thing. Do you have you need to get going?
Well, kind of I do. I got ribs going, and we're getting ready to have a big meal here in about an hour, and so I need to kind of try to finish off and get everything put together, to be honest with you.
Well, if you would like to reconvene later on, if you have the time, I've got a couple more names to ask you about, but we can cut it right here.
Yeah, that would be fine, and if you want to do it again, well, that'd be fine. We're kind of learning how to do it. My wife, she can do it now, hook me up pretty easy without being an issue. So
Oh, yeah, I'm free all day, so just let me know. Shoot me a text when you're free again this evening.
I will.
All right.
I will. As soon as I get lined out, we'll give you another call.
Thanks very much, Cap. Enjoy
Thank
that
you very
lunch.
much. Appreciate it, Tim.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.